Have you ever watched someone you loved become a stranger, right in front of you? The night Daniel caught his wife's hand lingering on her boss's shoulder, he thought it was just bad judgment. He was wrong. By the time the truth surfaced, he wasn't just betrayed. He was collateral damage in a fraud big enough to take down an entire company. Daniel Miller had never liked corporate events, but he'd shown up that night because Kate asked. Or maybe she hadn't asked. Maybe she just told him in that bright, decisive tone she used when she didn't expect disagreement. The gala was at a rented hall downtown. He slipped in behind a crowd of people buzzing about quarterly growth and market share, none of which mattered to him. He worked in community housing, building programs for people who couldn't afford better. A different world. He didn't mind that. He minded that Kate seemed to mind it more each year. She was already across the room when he arrived, a glass of champagne in her hand, her laugh carrying farther than she probably realized. He saw her touch the shoulder of a tall man in a charcoal suit, a man who stiffened at first, then forced a smile when he noticed Daniel watching. That was the moment something shifted in Daniel's chest, something he couldn't quite name yet. He waited until she noticed him, and when she did, her smile flickered but returned full force. "Daniel," she called, motioning him over like he was late to a rehearsal. "This is William Blake, our CEO." William offered a polite handshake. "Nice to finally meet you." He held the last word an instant too long, like Daniel had been a vague inconvenience they'd finally resolved. They made small talk that didn't go anywhere. William deflected questions about the company's new clients, and Kate kept cutting in with bright comments that didn't quite fit. When she brushed imaginary lint off William's sleeve for the third time, Daniel felt something in him close up. Not jealousy, something colder, something that felt like recognition. He waited until dessert to lean in and murmur, "Maybe he's up on the performance." Kate's fork paused halfway to her mouth. Her eyes didn't blink. Then she smiled, wide and deliberate, and her voice cut through the chatter around them. "Performance? You don't get to criticize me after I dragged you out here just so you could act like you belong." People were listening now. He felt the weight of their attention pin him in place. "You know what your problem is?" she went on, her tone climbing higher. "You don't do anything. You don't want anything. You're dead weight." He sat there for a second, trying to process what she just said. The words didn't feel real, not coming from her. Then, with a kind of mechanical calm, he stood and walked away. He didn't look back. Outside, the night air tasted cleaner. He called a cab, gave Evan's address without thinking. When Evan opened the door, he didn't ask questions. Daniel slept on the couch, his brain replaying Kate's words on a loop. The next morning, he went home. The apartment looked the same as always. A basket of clean laundry near the sofa, the faint smell of coffee. He set his bag down and took a deep breath he hoped would steady him. Kate was in the kitchen humming to herself, pouring batter onto a hot griddle. She looked up and smiled like nothing had happened. "You want pancakes?" He studied her carefully, searching for any sign she'd regret what she'd said. Nothing. Just that same bright tone she used when she was orchestrating reality. "I already ate," he said. His voice didn't sound like his own. "Oh," she replied, turning back to the stove. "Coffee's fresh." He moved past her to the sink. She kept humming as if the night before had never happened. He watched her for a while, trying to figure out if this was her way of apologizing. Pretend it didn't happen, smooth it over with normalcy. But the longer he stood there, the more he felt sure. She didn't think she owed him an apology. Finally, he set his glass down, careful not to slam it. "You called me dead weight," he said quietly. Kate didn't turn around right away. When she did, her smile was small, almost pitying. "I was frustrated. You picked a fight. I asked you not to drape yourself over your boss in front of me." Her laugh was too sharp. "You're being dramatic. God, Daniel, you always do this." He couldn't remember the last time she'd said his name without that edge. "All I wanted," he said, "was for you to treat me with some respect." She tilted her head, studying him like a lab specimen. "You're really going to let one night undo everything?" "It's not one night," he replied. "It's what you think of me." Her eyes narrowed, but she didn't argue. She didn't have to. They both knew he was right. A dull certainty settled in his chest. Whatever this was, this marriage, this performance, it had cracked in a way it couldn't be fixed. He left the kitchen without waiting for her to answer. The next few days passed in a strained routine. Daniel went to work, came home, and pretended he didn't feel like an intruder in his own life. Kate moved around the apartment as if she were starring in a commercial for domestic bliss. Cooking dinner, playing music, acting cheerful. It was as though if she ignored the damage long enough, it would disappear. He couldn't shake the memory of her voice calling him dead weight. He couldn't unhear the casual finality of it. When he tried to bring it up again, she shut it down with a breezy dismissal. I told you I was frustrated. You're overreacting. One evening, they were eating takeout in front of the TV. He turned the volume down and faced her. We need to talk about that night, he said. Kate didn't look up from her noodles. What night? The gala. She sighed, still not meeting his eyes. Daniel, I don't know what else you want me to say. I told you it wasn't personal. It was to me. Her mouth tightened. You're really going to keep circling this? I'm trying to understand, he said. You humiliated me, and you didn't care. Finally, she set her food aside and met his gaze. Her expression was almost tired. Do you want the truth? She asked. He nodded. She took a moment, like she was rehearsing the lines in her head. Sometimes I feel like I'm carrying everything. My career, our future, our reputation. You're just there. You don't have ambition. He let that sink in. It wasn't new, but hearing it out loud still stung. I never asked you to carry everything, he said quietly. She shrugged. But I did, and I'm tired. They sat in silence after that, the TV flickering in the background. He didn't know how to fix something that she no longer believed was worth saving. 2 days later, it happened. He was at his desk at the housing nonprofit, sorting files and trying to pretend he wasn't hollowed out. His phone buzzed with a new message, no name, just a number he didn't recognize. You need to see this. For a moment, he considered deleting it. But something in the bluntness made him pause. He clicked the link. A video began to load. The footage was grainy, black and white, time-stamped from the week before. It showed a glass-walled conference room. First, it was empty. Then Kate walked in alone. She looked calm, purposeful. A man entered, William Blake. Daniel felt his pulse spike. He leaned closer to the screen. The video had no sound, but their gestures were clear. She closed the door behind them. She pulled the shades. She stepped into his space and spoke. William's posture was defensive, uneasy. She smiled and he looked away. Then she reached for his tie. Daniel's throat closed. He watched, unable to look away, as she kissed William. At first, William resisted, bracing a hand against her shoulder. But she kept going, hands at his waist, pressing closer. He didn't push her away again. They disappeared below the edge of the frame. Daniel shut the tab and sat very still. His chest felt like it was being compressed. This wasn't suspicion anymore. This wasn't some insecurity she could dismiss. It was fact. His phone buzzed again. Sorry you had to see that. You deserve to know. Amanda. Amanda. He didn't recognize the name. But she knew more about Kate than he did. That night, he didn't go home. He stayed at Evans, staring at the ceiling. He felt like he was floating in some limbo between outrage and numbness. In the morning, he got another message from Amanda. If you want to talk, I'll be at Mayfield Diner after 6. He didn't reply, but at 6:30, he found himself standing outside the diner, watching her through the window. Amanda looked ordinary. A woman in her 30s with a tired expression and a cup of coffee she hadn't touched. When he walked in, she didn't smile. She gestured to the seat across from her. You're Daniel, she said. He nodded. She reached into a tote bag and pulled out a slim folder. I work in security at their building. I saw things you need to see. Daniel didn't speak. He just watched her lay out documents on the table, emails, logs, approvals. She wasn't just sleeping with him, Amanda said quietly. She created a fake consulting company, Apex Stride. She routed payments to it, tens of thousands. all signed off by her. Daniel felt sick. I started digging because she sabotaged my promotion, Amanda continued. I was next in line for a manager role. She got it overnight. He flipped through the documents. It was all their routing numbers, internal messages, forged invoices. You need to understand, Amanda said. If this goes public, they'll trace the money. To her. To anyone connected. Daniel closed the folder. His hands were shaking. Amanda looked at him steadily. I'm telling you because you look like someone who still believes he can fix this. You can't. But you can protect yourself. He didn't know what to say. Amanda slid a thumb drive across the table. Everything I have is on here. Keep it safe. Daniel took it like it might explode. Amanda stood. I hope you figure out what you need to do. Then she left. He stayed in the booth long after she was gone, the folder sitting in front of him like proof he hadn't asked for. When he finally walked back into the cold night, he felt lighter in one way and heavier in every other. Because now he knew the truth, and he couldn't unknow it. Daniel spent the next 2 days in a state that didn't feel like living. He went to work, but his mind was locked on the folder and the thumb drive hidden in his bag. At night, he sat on Evan's couch and backed up every file Amanda had given him. He wasn't sure what he was going to do with the evidence. All he knew was that he couldn't pretend anymore. On the third morning, he woke up to an urgent company-wide email from Kate's firm. All operations suspended. Report to headquarters immediately. His phone rang almost at the same time. Evan's voice was tense. Turn on the news. Daniel grabbed the remote, hands unsteady. The local channel was already broadcasting live footage outside Kate's building. Reporters were talking over each other as camera crews jostled for position. Federal investigation into fraud at Bourayant Tech Consulting Shell Company linked to senior staff. Millions in diverted funds, possible wire fraud charges. Daniel sank onto the edge of the couch. They had found it. Someone had blown it open before he could decide what to do. His phone buzzed again. This time, Kate's name flashed on the screen. We need to talk. He hesitated, then typed, I'll come by. When he stepped into the apartment, he saw her sitting on the edge of the bed. She didn't look up right away. They froze everything, she said, voice small. Our accounts, savings, retirement. Daniel stood in the doorway, watching her process the collapse. I thought it would be fine, she whispered. I thought William would take the heat if it came to it. He didn't answer. Kate finally raised her eyes to his. For a moment, she looked like the woman he'd met 10 years ago, someone who still believed in simple beginnings. But that woman was gone. I never meant for you to be part of this, she said. Daniel exhaled slowly. I know. She closed her eyes. I just wanted to be important. I wanted to walk into a room and know I mattered. You did matter, he said. Just not in the way you thought. Her shoulders slumped. It doesn't change anything. No. He set his bag down. Is it true? He asked finally. All of it. She nodded once. The fake invoices. The account. Yes. Why? She swallowed. It started small. William said we could get creative. He gave me routing numbers, templates. He told me if I handled it, I'd never have to worry about promotions again. And the affair? Her eyes moved past him, focusing on some point he couldn't see. I wanted leverage. I thought if he respected me, I'd be protected. And when I realized he didn't, it was too late. Daniel absorbed that in silence. She wiped her cheek. I know you'll never forgive me. I don't expect it. He stayed still. What happens now? She asked, voice low. He thought about the thumb drive, the backup files, the unspooled truth sitting on his laptop. An investigation, he said. Lawyers, maybe worse. Kate nodded, as if she'd already rehearsed it. They didn't speak for a while. He could hear the radiator knocking in the wall and the faint hum of traffic 6 floors down. Then she looked up. You should leave, she said quietly. It's not fair to ask you to stand next to me through this. He wanted to say something. Maybe that he'd already left her long before the evidence surfaced. But he didn't. Instead, he picked up his bag. "I'll come back for the rest of my things," he said. Kate didn't argue. He stepped into the hallway, and for the first time in weeks he felt something close to relief. Not because it was over, because it was finally undeniable. He spent the night back at Evan's. Neither of them said much. Evan just clapped a hand on his shoulder and handed him a beer. Daniel didn't even drink it. At dawn, his phone buzzed again. An email from Kate. Subject: "I was wrong. Body. I know that's not enough, but I wanted to start somewhere." He read it, then closed it without replying. By the end of the week, more headlines appeared. William Blake was named in federal filings. The CFO resigned. Indictments were expected. Daniel stayed out of it. He knew investigators would find his name on joint accounts, but Amanda's files showed he hadn't signed anything. He'd been collateral damage, nothing more. Late Friday, Amanda texted him, "Just checking in. You okay?" He typed back, "I don't know, but thank you for telling me." She didn't reply right away. When she did, it was simple. "You deserved the truth, even if it hurts." Daniel powered off his phone and sat by the window as the sun slipped behind the skyline. He felt like someone watching the last scene of a play he'd never auditioned for, finally realizing he'd been the extra the entire time. And for once, he didn't feel the need to step back onto the stage. The days after the scandal broke were a blur of headlines and phone calls. Federal agents seized records from Kate's office. William Blake was taken into custody first. His lawyer claimed he was a victim of manipulation, that he hadn't known where the money was going. Kate's name appeared in the news by the end of the week, labeled a key participant in the fraud. Daniel tried not to watch the coverage, but he couldn't help it. Each time he saw her face on the screen, a dull ache settled deeper in his chest. He felt embarrassed for still caring, even in the smallest way. One evening, she called. He almost didn't answer. When he finally did, her voice sounded thin. "They froze my personal accounts too," she said. "I have nothing left. They're saying I might be charged personally." He didn't respond. "Daniel," she whispered, "I don't know what to do." He closed his eyes. He didn't want to be the person she turned to anymore. "I'm not your lifeline," he said. "I know," she murmured. "I just don't have anyone else to call." They fell into silence. It wasn't the silence they'd shared at the start of their marriage, the comfortable quiet that meant everything was okay. This was the kind that said everything was broken beyond repair. After that call, he stopped picking up. He let her messages pile up in his inbox. Some were frantic. Some were strangely casual. He read them all but never replied. In one, she wrote, "I keep thinking about that night at the gala. I thought if I acted bigger than I was, I'd feel like someone important. I didn't realize I was just proving how small I felt." He didn't know whether she meant it or whether it was just another attempt to pull him back into her orbit. A week later, he came back to the apartment to collect the rest of his things. She wasn't home. He was glad. He didn't want to see the look on her face. He didn't want her apologies. He packed methodically. Clothes, old books, a few framed photos he couldn't bring himself to throw out yet. Before he left, he stood in the middle of the living room, trying to remember what it had felt like when this place was still theirs. It didn't feel like anything. Later that day, he got a call from an investigator. They asked him to confirm that he hadn't known about the consulting company or signed any approvals. He told them the truth. The call was short. The same evening, Amanda reached out again. "If you ever need someone to talk to, I'm here. No strings." Daniel typed a reply but erased it. He wasn't ready to talk to anyone who knew the full story. He wasn't ready to be anything except alone. The emails from Kate changed tone over the following weeks. First they were explanations, then confessions, then regret. One read, "I know I can't undo any of this, but you should know I never stopped caring about you, even when I made every wrong choice." Another simply said, "I keep remembering how you used to look at me, like I was enough. I don't know when I stopped believing it." He didn't respond to that one either. Some nights he lay awake thinking about how they'd ended up here. He remembered the early days, the simple plans, the way she'd once looked at him like he was her safe place. It was almost impossible to connect that memory to the woman who'd lied to his face and built a career on deceit. He knew that even if she somehow escaped prison, nothing between them could be repaired. The trust was gone. By the start of the second month, her messages slowed to once a week. He never opened them immediately. He started to feel like he was watching someone else's tragedy. At work, he focused on projects that grounded him, helping tenants apply for grants, managing budgets. He liked the clarity of those tasks. They didn't require him to guess anyone's motives. He moved into a small one-bedroom not far from Evan's place. He bought furniture that didn't remind him of her. He stopped counting the days since he'd left. Then, on a Tuesday morning, she called again. He let it ring until it cut off. 10 minutes later, an email arrived. "I'm gonna lose everything. The lawyers say there's no way to avoid prison time. I don't know who I'll be when this is over." He read it, then set his phone face down. That night, he thought about what he'd say if he answered her. He wondered if he'd feel relief if she was finally convicted and out of his life for good. But when he imagined it, there was no satisfaction, no sense of justice. Only exhaustion, because she hadn't just stolen money. She'd stolen the version of himself who believed he was enough. The next day, he started walking to work instead of taking the train. He liked the cold air in his lungs, the rhythm of his footsteps. It felt like progress, even if nothing else did. And for the first time in a long while, he started to believe he might survive the fallout. Spring came to Chicago in uneven bursts, cold mornings, sudden warm afternoons. Daniel started to notice the way the light changed on his walk to work. Some days it made him feel hopeful. Other days it just reminded him how quickly everything could shift. Kate's messages had slowed to one every 2 weeks. He never replied, but he still read them. Maybe he was looking for something. A sign that she understood what she'd done, not just to her company but to him. One Friday afternoon, a letter arrived in his mailbox. It was in her handwriting, folded carefully into a plain envelope. "I know this is probably the last thing you want, but I can't leave it unsaid." He sat at the kitchen table and read every line. She wrote about her trial date, how her lawyer warned she'd likely face time in federal prison. She didn't ask him to help or show up. She didn't ask him to forgive her. She only wrote, "I kept thinking that if I worked hard enough, if I proved myself enough, I'd feel like I deserved you. But all I did was ruin us. I'm sorry." He folded the letter and set it aside. He didn't feel relief or satisfaction, just a kind of dull acceptance. The next week, he saw her one last time. He was crossing Jefferson Street on his way to the office. She was standing at a bus stop across the intersection. She didn't see him. She held a small duffel bag, her posture tired. She looked around as if she was searching for a familiar face, but there was no one. For a moment, he thought about walking over. Part of him wanted to hear her voice one more time, to understand if she felt regret or just fear. But he stayed where he was, because he knew no explanation would change what she'd done. The light changed, and the bus arrived. She boarded without hesitation and disappeared behind the closing doors. Daniel exhaled, feeling something he couldn't quite name. Not victory, not loss, just an ending. That evening, he packed away the last box of shared belongings he'd kept. Old photos, anniversary cards, a few small things that no longer meant anything. He didn't burn them or throw them out. He just put them in a closet and shut the door. Later, he sat on the small balcony outside his apartment. He listened to the city settling into night, cars on the avenue, the low hum of distant voices. He thought about everything he'd lost and everything he might still become. He understood now that leaving her wasn't about punishing her. It was about saving himself. The final message from Kate came a week before her sentencing. No subject line, no greeting, just a single line. "I hope someday you remember something good about us, even if it's only for a minute." He closed the email without reading it again, because the truth was he did remember good things. He remembered the way she used to dance in the kitchen when they first moved in together. He remembered how she'd tucked notes into his lunch bag when he was working overtime. He remembered the version of her who hadn't needed to win every room she walked into. But none of that meant he could ever go back. That was the last time she reached out. The trial moved quickly. He followed it from a distance, reading updates online. When the verdict came in, guilty on multiple counts of fraud, he felt only a tired acceptance. She would serve time, maybe rebuild her life afterward. But he wouldn't be there to see it. On a Saturday morning, Daniel walked to the same diner where he'd first met Amanda. He ordered coffee and sat by the window, watching people pass on the sidewalk. Couples, families, strangers. No one knew what he'd been through. No one knew he'd once given everything he had to someone who mistook it for weakness. Amanda showed up a few minutes later. She hadn't expected him to call. But when he did, she came without hesitation. She slid into the booth across from him, studying his face. "You okay?" she asked. He nodded. Getting there. They didn't talk much about Kate. They didn't need to. They talked about work, about the projects he was planning for the housing nonprofit, about how strange it felt to finally have nothing to hide. When he stood to leave, Amanda touched his arm. "You did the right thing," she said. "Even if it feels like hell." He believed her. Walking home, he realized that the hardest part hadn't been discovering Kate's betrayal. It hadn't been packing up their life or facing the investigation. The hardest part was accepting that loving her hadn't been enough to keep her honest, or keep himself whole. But he also understood something he hadn't before. There was no shame in having believed in someone. The shame would have been in staying after he knew the truth. At his apartment, he set his keys on the counter and looked around. For the first time, it felt like his space. No ghosts, no unfinished conversations, just a place to begin again. He didn't know if he'd ever see Kate again. He didn't know if she'd find a way to redeem herself. But he knew her story was no longer his to carry. And for now, that was enough.